I'm very happy to host today Anita Graser. She's from Austria. She is one of the most expert person in QGIS. She developed a lot of pieces in QGIS. She is part of the committee of GIS taking care of the development of the software. So despite the fact that he's so young, because you see that she's just a few years more than you, very few years, but despite that, she's very well known in the open source world, being so, having been so important in the last year about with respect to the development of QGIS. But you have, you have also your CV, and so you can tell about yourself to the students. And this lesson is a mix of theoretical and practical. That is the reason why, if you have the computer, is much better. In such a way that you can go ahead also with some exercises. And I believe that every time you have a question, you can raise your hand, because Anita will be very happy in answering all your doubts. You have to consider that she's here just today, so you will not have the opportunity of asking her something next week. And so everything that you don't understand, please ask. Okay, the floor is to you.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, Maria. So, as you already mentioned, I've been involved with the QGIS project for quite a while now. And I consider myself a power user of QGIS. Why is this maybe an important distinction? It's because there is a lot of different people involved in an open source project that is as big as QGIS. Obviously, you have developers. QGIS is written in C++. You need some serious software engineering skills to be able to be a core developer in the QGIS project. But as you probably already know, if you have used QGIS, there are Python plugins and other ways to extend QGIS with Python. So a lot of users, they also get involved in developing these plugins and other ways of automating the processes that you can perform in QGIS. And those people are usually called the power users. The ones who don't just use what already exists, but they build new building blocks on top of the existing tools and try to enhance the whole project. I've also been involved in a lot of writing about QGIS, so I wrote one of the earliest books that you could widely buy at Amazon and all the other online stores. By now there is a ton of different titles, and probably I would recommend different books than the ones that I wrote in the beginning. But you can find them all on the QGIS website. I was also involved for a while in the OSGeo board of directors. OSGeo is this umbrella organization, so you have to imagine there's a lot of different open source projects out there, not just QGIS, but also GraphQGIS and Saga and PostGIS and all those different projects, and they want to coordinate. They want to do kind of lobbying together to convince people that open source is not just a game, it's actually serious software that many people do use in professional settings, and that you probably, if you haven't tried it so far, you should seriously consider using it in your work. To save money, to gain freedom, and to be able to influence how the software develops, which is one of the huge differences, because in a lot of countries, like here in Italy, or also in many German-speaking countries, or even in Australia, you will find developers right around the corner who can, if you hire them, make the software exactly what you need it to be. Try that with a commercial software. Try going to Microsoft, try going to Oracle and convincing them, I have 5,000 euros, can you make this for me? Can you implement this? It will never happen. You would have to add a couple of zeros behind the 5,000 euros, or just wait forever. So one thing I really want to emphasize whenever I give an introduction in the workings of an open source project is it's not just developers who sit somewhere in a cellar who work in their free time. It's quite the opposite. It's a lot of people. It's people who write documentation. It's people who do the organizational stuff like registering trademarks and running server hardware for you to be able to download the software. It's people who talk to sponsors and to donors to ensure that we have some money to run events and developer meetings where the people can actually meet in person, exchange ideas, maybe resolve some issues, which is not so easy to do if you only talk online. You probably know that if you have just emails going back and forth, it can sound quite controversial sometimes. And it's much easier if you talk in person to figure out, okay, what does this person intend to do? What does that person intend to do? Maybe they're talking about the same thing, but there's just a misunderstanding. That's why we have to meet in person from time to time, and that's why money coming in is so important as well for open source projects. Even if we, as a project, we don't pay the developers. The developers get paid from users. So whenever there's a user who either needs support or who needs a new feature, they hire the developers. The project does not employ any developers. The project does not employ anyone. It's all volunteer-based. We only have, I think it's 30 or 40,000 euros that we spend per year on proposals where people can propose ideas for how to improve the infrastructure. For example, some test infrastructure or documentation, and then they get paid for those couple of hours that they spend on this. And then we spend the rest of our annual budget of around 100,000 euros on bug fixing. That's all the money that we have. We have the money of 100,000 euros in Silicon Valley, you couldn't employ a single person for that money. So I think it's working quite efficiently, and it's also very open, so you can find the budget and whatever we spend, the donations on the website, always online, always up to date. So with this short introduction, and if you have, please.
Yes, no, I wanted, because I don't know, what is your involvement in the Google Summer? This can be something of interest of them. So
right.
Are you mentoring also some Google Summer of Code proposal?
Google Summer of Code is very interesting in a way that the OSGeo applies as an organization to Google Summer of Code, and they have been quite successful. So they usually get into the program. I haven't seen a year yet where it wasn't involved. And then QGIS as a sub-project of OSGeo can propose different topics. And that usually works the way that a student finds a mentor in the QGIS community, and they develop an idea for a Google Summer of Code project. For example, recently there have been developments in rendering 3D scenes in QGIS. So the important thing is to write to the mailing list, to propose the topic that you would like to work on, and to try find someone who can mentor you. That mentor is usually someone who knows that part of the code base really well. So if it's something like 3D rendering, there's a couple of people who have done the 3D rendering in the past, and they will be the mentors. I've been mentoring one student, or co-mentoring with a second developer, a student who was working on the symbology sharing plugin. Because there the idea was, okay, how can we make it possible for users to develop symbols and cartographic icons and to share it with other users. The same way that you can download plugins, you can download other resources. And there I was co-mentoring more, and I was more representing the approach that a user would have to what does this plugin have to be able to do for a user to be helpful. And then there was a developer who knew the back-end code of this whole infrastructure thing to develop that. So I do sometimes mentor Google Summer of Code students, but the topic has to fit the mentor, so I cannot just take on any project. But the first point of connection is always on the mailing list if you're interested in that. The time schedule could be a bit of a challenge here. I don't know if you've done Google Summer of Code before. It starts really early, so when the American universities shut down in end of May, then you're supposed to start your work, and it already finishes at the end of July, I think.
Yeah, no, yeah. It's later. It's not at the end of July. Even when is the end of the summer of Code? End of August.
End of August.
But it is more or less now the time to apply. So it is something that probably you can consider in one of the next lessons to go and see what is Google Summer of Code and how it is possible to apply. But it's something more for developing the new functionalities into open source GIS. What is interesting is that you are paying. So you receive some money, but you have to work, obviously. It's not a donation given to you, but you are paying for developing some pieces of software, and you can propose what you want to develop. And then if you find a mentor, that can be a mentor in QGIS, for instance, and your proposal is awarded, you start working. You go ahead working all the summer, because it's all the summer, and then by the end of August, you have to deliver your product. With the help of the mentor, but the mentor is not doing the work for you, the mentor is just mentoring you. It means that you have to spend your summer in working, that, because she did that. So, yeah. But at the end of the day, how much was the award? So it is $6,000. You have to consider that you have to work for $6,000. So it is good because you have some money, but it is good also because you can put it in your CV. That is the second reason why it is important. It is something that you can put in your CV, and then this is giving you more points with respect to the other people. But obviously, the disadvantage is that you have to work hard for that. It's not a donation, it's you are really doing. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so it's expected that you have regular reports. So most of the Google Summer of Code students, they then start writing a blog where they weekly post their status of the work and what they have achieved and where they may be stuck. And then there's an intermediate report that the mentors have to review, and they have to send it to Google, and they basically have to confirm that the student is actually working on something. I think then you get like half of your money, or some share, I'm not sure anymore. And then if you continue and if you finish in the end and the mentors say, yeah, the person did what they were proposing to do, then you get the rest of the money. That's basically how this thing works. Okay. This is going to be a challenge, but we will try anyway. At least I'm not falling asleep if I have to shout like this. So what I've prepared for you today is a pretty hands-on workshop. So I was told that you all already have some experience with GIS and also including QGIS, so this does not start from the very beginning. But as the title already suggests, it's about advanced visualization. So all the things that you can do with QGIS beyond the basics. And I hope you have all installed a rather recent version of QGIS, ideally the version 3.4 or later. Maybe just for context, if you install QGIS, you always have the choice to install different versions. QGIS 3.4 is the current LTR, and LTR stands for long-term release. This version is maintained with bug fixes for 12 months, for a whole year. And afterwards we will have a new LTR. The big advantage, and why we always recommend using LTR versions like 3.4 in teaching, is that you don't have to change your material every 4 months, right? Because otherwise we have 3 releases per year, and every release changes something. So you always will have to update all your materials and that's just not feasible, and that was the feedback from a lot of universities, and one of the reasons why we have LTR now for use in teaching and also in professional settings where the individual users, they cannot install their own software on their own machines because some IT department controls what gets installed or not. However, if you install 3.4, you should always install the updates as well. So it's important to not stay with 3.4.0, but if there is a bug fix update, you should install 3.4.1.2.3 because they will get better with time when the remaining bugs are getting fixed. That's a bit of the background story about the version numbers, which I think is important from the user's perspective. Also, if you find a bug in a recent version, so not in 3.4.0, but in 3.4.8 or whatever version we are at now, please do report it. It's very easy now because the issue tracker has moved to GitHub. So if you already have an account on GitHub, you can very easily report issues for QGIS so that they can get fixed. It's really, really important to report those things because if it's not reported, it cannot be fixed. Okay, do you all have the materials or does anyone still need time to download any of the stuff? If you have downloaded the zip file with the materials, it contains a data folder basically. It contains a plugins folder with one of the plugins that I will be using. And it contains the document which has the high-level instructions of what we will be doing now. So it's not a step-by-step instruction guide because I don't believe in step-by-step instructions, but it just tells you what we will be doing instead of exactly how and which button. So the content, to sum it up, is first I will show you a couple of things about setting up the project. If you have already used QGIS, some of those things will look familiar to you, but maybe I can show you some extra little tricks for working a bit more efficiently. Then we will be going into using dynamic visual attributes. That means we are not going to just have all the features in a layer styled the same way, but we will have them styled differently based on their attribute value. And then we will be going towards making print maps and reports as well, and then we can see how much time we still have and how the energy level in the room is. Please, whenever you have any questions about general things, don't hesitate to ask. Maybe you can also ask your neighbor if he or she has already figured it out. Please help each other because there's quite a couple of people in the room and otherwise I have trouble reaching everyone in here. So, let's get started. If you start QGIS for the first time, if you have never started before, this area will be empty, but for me it shows a couple of the recent projects I've been working on. So that's convenient, of course, but it might also just look like this and be an empty map, an empty project. So how can we basically add data to this project? There is at least 3 different ways how to do it. The most classic one, and something that a lot of users were wanting, is the one button to add all the layers, which is the data source manager. And it's either here in the toolbar or in the layer data source manager. This is the unified tool to add all the different data sets, from vector to raster to databases like PostGIS or Spatial Light to web services like WMS or WFS. So in the data set we have for this course, there is a vector data set, And you can see how we can open the zip file without actually unzipping it, because you can access all the layers that are in it. So we can have the countries and we can have the places, and we can add them to our project. But that's one option. It's not my favorite option by far. I think the QGIS user interface has much better options to add layers. And my favorite option is this browser window. If you don't see this browser window on the left side, you can enable it by going to View, Panels, Browser. And it basically shows you your whole computer, and you can navigate to different places. Like I can also go here to the Downloads folder and to Workshops, and I can add the data from here as well. I can look into the zip file, and I can drag and drop data from the browser into the map. So this is very convenient because it stays open. You can drag and drop individual files into the map as you want. And also, you don't have to go all this way from the top to the zip file every time, because you can do right-click, add as favorite on any of the folders here. And when you do that, then there will be a shortcut added to the top of the browser here. And you will be able to access the data from this shortcut. So if you have a really nested data storage on your drives, you can add a couple of favorites and have a shorter time navigating to all those data sets. And finally, something that is also really convenient and intuitive is to simply drag and drop the dataset from the file browser. So if you're in a file browser, you can also just drag and drop your files into the QGIS GUI, and you can also add the files from here. So no unzipping. If you want, just drag and drop from the Data Explorer and you're good to go. Another neat trick, if you have QGIS3, because it was introduced, I think, in 3.0, is the styling panel. I mean, this workshop is about advanced visualizations, so obviously we will be talking about the styling. Because by default, QGIS just loads all the features in a layer with some random color. And it very rarely gets it right, to be blunt. So we obviously want to change that. And the old way of doing it, and how it's done in many GIS, is that you open the layer properties. Here you can do it by double-clicking the layer or by right-clicking and going to the context menu. So the old school is that you change the symbology here, then you click on apply, and then you only then do you see what you actually changed. So this is not very interactive, it's not very user-friendly. If you have a small screen, then you don't see very much. You have to move it around. So the alternative that has been implemented is this browser panel, the styling panel. You can open it with the leftmost button here on top of the layer list. And what it does is it opens all the styling options on the right-hand side of your screen. At least by default it's on the right-hand side. And now whatever change that you make here is automatically translated into the map. So there is this live update check mark down here, and it means that you don't have to hit apply. Whenever you change something on the right-hand side, it will be changed on the map. And you can change the layers. either here or on the left side. Either way is fine. So if we want to make the basic map that we see in the materials, let's just do that real quick. We want the gray filling for the countries. So a simple fill is fine, and we have a fill color that is gray. With a solid fill style, and then we have a stroke color, which we can make wider or not. And then we have the point layer, which can also be styled in something. For example, with the purple dot here. Okay. So the first thing that we can do to make our map a bit more data-driven and not just have the same symbol for every of the cities that we have in this populated places data set is to apply different symbol sizes to the points. And there's a couple of different ways how to do this, to have this data-defined symbol size. And one of them is using the size assistant. And this is a really convenient way of how to do that. If you go see here, there's a size, and there is this symbol right next to it. This symbol appears in a lot of different settings in the stylings dialog. And if you hover over it, you see that it's called the data-defined override. So all the things here, and there's even more of them if you choose the simple marker, all the settings here, they can be overwritten with a data-defined setting. But let's first have a look at the size, because there it's quite obvious how it works. So you can click on this, and what you find in the bottom of this context menu is the assistant. And when you go to the assistant, let me just look up. We can, for example, adjust the size according to the population of the places. This data set it's from Natural Earth, which you are probably familiar with. It's this large open data set. And it contains population data from many different years. They all start with pop something. And I will be just choosing the pop max because it's here in the top of the list. So we say we want the values from pop max, and then we can either enter the minimum and the maximum value that we want to represent here manually, or we can click on the load button. And if we click on the load button, then QGIS automatically looks up what are the minimum values, what are the maximum values. And it also applies already a scale, so from a size from 1 pixels to 10 pixels, according to this plenary method. There's also different methods that you can look at to see how they affect the output. So the one that is never recommended in cartography is the radius, so you usually don't want to scale the radius. What you find in a lot of GIS is that it's based on the surface, the scaling. But the default in QGIS is plenary, and as far as I understand it, there is some more research behind it, exactly how the changing size is perceived by the map readers. And this is supposed to be a bit easier to distinguish the different sizes of the symbols. But for the details, I would have to refer you to the literature in this case. So with this size assistant, it's really easy to set up a symbology for different sizes. If you didn't know this option, you've probably heard of a different one that also works, and that would be the categorized renderer. So QGIS offers you a series of different renderers. The single symbol is basically every symbol is same, except for if you start playing with the data-defined overrides, because then they become dynamic. But basically every symbol starts in the same shape and size. Then there is categorized. If you have different categories in your data, like different types of tree, then you could have every type of tree with a different symbol, or at least with a different color. And then you have graduated, which is usually for numerical values. So if you want to visualize temperature or income, something like that, you would have a scale of some numeric values. Then there's rule-based, which is really great because you can have all kinds of different rules. For example, if the value is smaller than 10 and the area of the feature is larger than 10 square kilometers, then I want it in this color. And if the value is larger, then I want a different color. So here you can build really complex things as well. The last three are a bit more exotic. They are not used every day. So the point displacement was developed for if you have multiple points at exactly the same location. So the use case that comes up here is if you have students at an elementary school and multiple students, they have the same home address because they probably live in a big building. And still you want to be able to visualize that they all live there. So you have this point displacement, which is a marker in the center with little markers around it, which show you that there's actually multiple points at this one location. Then there's a cluster renderer as well, which is the points don't have to be at the exactly same location, but they get clustered together dynamically. And of course there's a heat map, because people like to do heat maps. Yeah, it looks fancy. So the other option for these different sized circles that you can use is the graduated renderer. Because the graduated renderer by default, and the way that most people use it is it applies this color ramp. So if we also use our PopMax here, and we click on classify, then we get the color ramp applied. And we also get our sizes applied here because it still remembers the setting that we had before. So when we click on the symbol here, there's still the yellow marker here, which means that there's still the data-defined override active. We can deactivate that by right-clicking on it. If we deactivate it, then the symbols go back to all being the same size. And you can right-click again to reactivate it. But basically, let's imagine they are all the same size. What I really wanted to show you here is that the graduated renderer does not just have a color method, it also has a size method. So you can also create maps where the symbol size varies using the graduated renderer. And also here you can input the smallest size and the largest size, and it will automatically create the classes based on the dataset values. So the main difference between the two, on the first side, they look very similar in outcome, the results. But what QGIS does here is it creates 5 classes, or however many classes you specify, and exactly these 5 classes. So everything in between, everything that fits in one of those buckets will be same size. On the other hand, if you use the size assistant that we had first, then every circle has a different size, because for every circle, the function in the background computes an individual size. So it's not classified into buckets, but on a continuous scale, which is probably the main difference between the two options. our symbols, and that's a good start. Of course, we can also do the same stuff with labeling, because labeling and symbols, they all go hand in hand, and they have very similar functionality in QGIS. So if you want to do labeling, you just switch to the second tab on the styling panel. So again, you don't have to open the layer properties, you can all do it in the panel. And we can change here from no labels to single label. And obviously what we want to display first is the name of the places. So we can do that. One of the things you probably notice, it will depend on the settings of your machine, is that here there are still some special characters that are not displayed quite so nicely. And if you run into issues like that, it's always because of the encoding. The encoding is not set correctly, and that's why you get, or at least I get, weird little characters here in Reykjavik. And if you want to fix that, then you have to go to the layer properties, source settings, and here is the data source encoding. And unfortunately, if the metadata of your dataset doesn't tell you the encoding, you're basically down to guessing. And the guessing usually involves thinking where the dataset comes from and what are the usual encodings used for that language or region. So if this was a dataset that was created in Austria, I would go with Latin 1. If that is a data, but that's already my my system encoding. So this one is probably in UTF-8. All the good datasets should be in UTF-8. So let's try this. Yeah. So you can see Reykjavik now has this E with the accent, and also Male also has the E with the accent. So with UTF-8 encoding, this is right. You can save yourself some troubles if you don't use shapefiles, if you use some proper exchange formats where the encoding is specified in the dataset, then you won't run into such trouble. But if you get a shapefile from somewhere, you will probably see these weird characters, and then you have to go to this encoding setting. Not just in QGIS, it also happens in text editors, it happens in other GIS software. You always have to know the encoding. So now we have some labels, and QGIS places the labels as best as it can. It has some optimization algorithms that try to place as many labels as possible, but by default it doesn't know which cities are more important than others. It just places the labels if there is some space. But let's take it step by step. The first thing that I suggest doing is we improve the placement a bit, because the default placement is not very pretty. So if you see all the different options here that we have for labels, the placement tab is the second last. And I think it should be default, but it isn't. So let's activate the cartographic placement of labels. The only difference between a round point and cartographic is that the order of preference of where to put the label is a different one. So cartographic starts, it tries first placing it in the top right corner or top right side of the point. Then it tries, I think, on the left top, and then it tries on the bottom corners, and if neither of those fits, then it tries to center them somewhere else around it. And the round point does it in a different order. And then you also have the option to have now the labels all get stuck to the center of the point. So particularly for the bigger cities like Cairo or Mumbai, you can see that the label is on top of the symbol. If you want to avoid that, you can change here from distance offset from point to distance offset from symbol bound. In that way, the label is moved to be outside of the symbol, and it adjusts to the size of each individual symbol. And then finally, a bit for readability, even if it's controversial, in a lot of maps it just helps to add a text buffer around the labels. Maybe not in 100% white, but in some 50% white. So that's up to you and your cartographic sensibilities if you want to add that, but it certainly helps. So with that in place, I want to add some extra information, because we don't just want the name of the place, we also want to add the population information. So the same field that we use to scale the symbols, we also want to write the value down in the label. So of course we could change here, instead of the name, show the population number, but let's try to show both. And one way to do it is by pressing the so-called expression button that is here right next to the drop-down thing with the E on it. And it opens this expression builder, which you probably know from many other places in QGIS as well. So here you can create very complex expressions, but the one we want is basically show us the name and show us the population value. So all the fields that are available in your layer are listed here under fields and values. So you don't have to know exactly how it's written, because you can look it up here, which is very convenient. So we already have the name, and then we want to add the population max. And you can just double click here to add the value to the expression on the left. Now currently it says the expression is invalid, because we have just added name and population max here. So what we can do is add some concatenation operator. And the concatenation operator that is used here is the same that is used in SQL. So if you know SQL syntax, that's exactly the same. So the two pipes, if you don't want to type them, you also have the button up here. It's the two straight lines called pipes, string concatenation operator. And if you put that between the name and the pop max field, then the expression becomes valid, and you can see the preview down here. The only problem now is that there is no space between the name and the population. So if we want to add a space, we have to add it. And that means single quotation marks, space, and a closing single quotation mark. This is something that trips up many users in the beginning, when to use the single quotation mark and when to use the double quotation mark. When you use a double quotation mark, it means that you're referring to a field. So name written like this is the field with the name. If we change the double quotation mark to single quotation mark here, then it doesn't refer to the field anymore, but it refers to the text name. So here it just writes name and 832. So this is something that is very easy to get wrong if you're not used to it, and if something behaves strangely, it is probably because of the double quotation marks and the single quotation marks. And in this fashion, you can also do the example that is given here in the workshop materials. You can also put the brackets around it. So instead of just a space, you have a space and an opening bracket, and in the end, you add the closing bracket, always under the single quotation marks. Let's hit apply. We're not quite there yet, because what we have now is very, very long numbers, particularly for the large cities. So obviously what we still want to do is we want to round it to just show how many millions of people live there. So we can go back to our expression, and we can use all kinds of different mathematical operators here, of course. So we can divide by 1 million. And then we still have to round, because otherwise we just get 0 point something something something. And let's look up how the syntax is for this round function. So it's probably called something like round, and we can use this search to look up all the functions that are available. So we don't just find the function, but we also find examples of how to use the function. So on the right bottom here, you have usage examples. You can have round with 2 parameters. So the second parameter say how many digits after the comma you want to keep. Or if you don't give a second parameter, then you don't keep any digits after the after the comma. So I suggest to keep maybe 1 digit after the comma. So we use round 1. I get a preview of Vatican City, which is a bit of a problem because there are so few inhabitants in Vatican City that it just rounds it to 0 now. That's why I will hit OK to see if it actually did the right thing. Yeah, so it now says Moscow has 10 million and Cairo has 11.9 million. This data is probably not very much up to date, but our expression does work. Is that fine so far?
No, could we double check it again? And then get the comma part, last part.
So you can also introduce some line wraps here to make it a bit more readable. So the round function here has the population divided by 1 million as the first parameter, and then the second parameter is just 1.
Is it okay for everyone?
Did you find it? Did you? So let's bring the whole thing.
Yes.
We can now take it full circle, and we can also change the label size to represent the size of the city. So the label size is defined on the first tab, and also here on the right hand side you again find the data defined override buttons with the size assistant. So you can also go in here and you can again choose the population max, and you can have a differently sized labels. They're just really tiny, so what you will want to do is change the sizes that are output to something more sensible. So any label under 5 pixels is probably unreadable. So if you change those output values from 5 to 20, then you get a more reasonable appearance of the labels here. if you really want to fine-tune it, you can also apply your own transformation curve. So you don't have to be just happy with and content with the linear scaling from the lowest value to the highest value, but you can actually change this curve if you activate it, and then you can have some exponential scaling of your labels. So this is pretty powerful. However, QGIS still just does a best effort of placing the labels. It's not guaranteed that you always see all the labels because there's usually just not enough space to do it. So the last thing that I want to talk about labels here is probably to show you the priorities. So again, on the placement settings, on the bottom of this tab, there is the priority. So priority can work in different ways because you can have multiple layers which have labeling activated. So you can say, okay, first I want to label all the cities, and if there is still space, then you can label some airports, and if there is still space, then you can label some villages. And then you would say, okay, I'll put the priority of the cities to the top, then in the middle I would have the airports and the villages at the bottom. So you have different priorities for different layers. But you can also have different priorities for different features within the layer. So if you don't just change the setting here, but if you again go to the data-defined override, then you can set the priority to one of the values of the attribute table. So you could also set the priority here to any of the values from the population or some of the scale rank that you have in here. Okay. If that's fine with you, then I want to continue with a different feature. Yes, please.
Now I want to know if everything is fine, or because we now finished also the labels, if you have doubts, questions about what we saw by now. Were you able to do the same? Is everything fine? Okay. So we can go ahead.
Okay, awesome. So the second example that I want to show is a choropleth map. But before we now jump in and change all the styling settings of our layer, I want to show you some really nice feature that QGIS has. I don't know if it's unique, but I think it's totally underused because most people don't know that it exists. And that is the fact that each layer in QGIS can have multiple different styles associated with it. So it's not just the style that you see here, but there could be multiple others and you can switch between them very easily. And to do that, you have to go to the context menu of the layer, and here you can see currently we have only one style, and that is called default. But we can add another one, and the new one that we add, that will be the choropleth map. So let's click add. First, let's save this one. So this is labeled cities. And now I add another one, and that will be the choropleth. So now there's choropleth, default, and labeled cities. And choropleth is active, so this is the one that we now change if we do any changes. I'll just deactivate the populated places because we don't need that for that one. What we want to show in the choropleth map is the GDP per capita. And what we have in our data set is the GDP estimated values and the estimated values for the population. So obviously for choropleth map, we want to use the graduated renderer again. And the first step would be to use the GDP. The code is GDP_MD_estimated. And we can use one of the nicer color ramps. But as you have probably learned in your cartography or whatever other class that you take, visualizing absolute values is a no-go. You always have to scale it either by area or by population, depending on what you visualize. So what we really want to do here is to divide this value by the population estimate. And there's a couple of outliers, that's why the equal interval looks so weird. Because there's Antarctica, which probably has some weird numbers of population and GDP, which is a complete outlier on this highest value here. So if you have an equal value, it all looks the same. But if you change to equal to quantiles, you can see the expected picture of the richer nations and the poorer nations appear in the map as well. You probably noticed that I didn't open the expression builder this time because you can also directly type in here the expression if you happen to know it or if you're just copying it from somewhere. But obviously it's much safer to go through here because here again in the fields you can look up exactly how every little field is called and you see the preview of whether you got the expression correctly or not.
Sorry. I didn't find the GDP. Where is it?
You can probably use the search here. If you're in the expression builder, the search also searches the names of the fields.
Yeah, I didn't find it there either. Or maybe I did.
No? But I used the same download that I gave you. That's weird.
Are you using the proper layer? Did you switch from point
Are you
layer
in the
to-
polygon layer or are you in the point layer?
Yeah, there we go. I was in the wrong place.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
When I changed the symbol to graduated, it disappears.
You have to click hit the classify button. You don't have any classes right now. Now you have. And then again, it now has all the same color. That's probably because of the
Yes, I was different.
because you haven't divided it by the population yet. So if you zoom out the map, you can see the big countries with high GDP. They have a big
It's kind of similar. I think it was. I was just looking for the GDP.
So now that we've set up a basic choropleth map as our second style, what we can do, or what I could do if I had done it on the correct layer, is I can change between the different styles. So if you right click and style and you choose one of the other ones that you have saved, you can access them really easily without redoing anything. You don't have to duplicate the layer, you just store another style. So to add a style, you go here to styles and edit.
Yeah, but we added the slide to first one before.
Yeah, that was my mistake. So it's it was meant to be on the polygon layer. So you can open the data-driven project, and then you get the style definition as I was intending it to be.
Okay, I wonder if you want to have a short break or we go ahead. What do you prefer? Because generally it's time for the break now.
Yeah, then let's have a break. If you always have a break, then let's have a break.
Yes.
So I hope you had a good break and you were able to regain some of the energy. Before we continue with some more stuff, let's just quickly recapitulate. And if you got stuck somewhere and couldn't follow until the end in the first part of the workshop, you can follow me now with all the steps. I just loaded the one of the projects that are provided in the data folder. It's called example 1 start, and you can load it just like you load a data set by dragging and dropping or double clicking on it in the browser, and it will get you to the status of the after loading the two layers. So this is one of the views that we had. What we did here is we used the size assistant to scale based on the population. And then we also did some labeling stuff, which I will not repeat. But this was the main idea here. And this is the basic map that we designed. One thing that I did not mention is, okay, that the others join us as well. On the countries layer, I showed you how to set up different styles. So we had the basic style, and we added a choropleth style with a graduated renderer and with the GDP divided by the population estimate. And basically, whenever the map is empty, after you do configure the settings, then you still need to hit the classify button. That is missing if your map stays empty. And in this case, we already discussed that we need to go to quantiles to have a reasonable distribution. So this makes a choropleth style, and beforehand, if we have two styles, we can change between them on the individual layer without much hassle. One thing I want to add to this is that you cannot just have different styles for individual layers, but you can also have different combinations of active layers in what is called here in QGIS a map theme. So the map theme will say which layers are active and which style is active in a layer. So we can create one map theme with this choropleth. So the map themes are stored here in the layers, the third button with the eye. If you click this, you find here the add theme button, and I can have a choropleth theme that stores the information that the countries layer with the choropleth styling is active. And then I can change the style from the choropleth to the default and maybe activate the populated places again. And I can store this as another theme. So this would be the theme places. And now I have two themes here, and I can change between them like I could change between the styles beforehand. And it will automatically change which layers are active and which styles are active for each layer. It's like having multiple projects without needing to have multiple projects.
So the theme is something like the slide?
Like what?
Like the sign that we say, that we add. Style.
Like a sign?
Style.
Well, the terminology is style is for an individual layer, and theme is refers to the whole map. So the map contains this layer and that layer, and this layer has a particular style and that layer has a particular style. So it works on different levels. The one is in the context menu of the layer because it only affects this individual layer, and the other is in the context of the whole project. That's why it's up here in the layer list, and it controls multiple layers at the same time. So with rule-based renderers, you can also create graduated or so-called value by alpha maps, which are basically show two variables at the same time. You can find examples online or in books. I won't go into that right now. But the final of the styling choices that I wanted to showcase here, because it's also really interesting to use and very easy to use in QGIS, is highlighting a particular area by applying a mask. And by applying a mask that is not just take a large polygon and cut a hole in it, but that is something more flexible and data-driven. So basically how this works is we will take the country layer, we will make a copy out of it, and then we select a certain area that we want to highlight it, and then we apply a mask outside of this area. So let's do that. To duplicate the layer, you can right-click on it, and there's a duplicate layer in the context menu. And we want the top one to be our mask, so I will rename the one on the top to mask. You can either right-click, rename, or hit F2. And what we want for the mask is basically white symbol, but we want to apply the mask outside of the area. So here we will use one of the more exotic options, and that's the inverted polygon renderer. So the inverted polygon renderer does not fill the inside of the polygon, but the outside of the polygon. And we want it together with a single symbol. So basically right now all we achieved is a black sea, because that's the non-country places, and they are now black with what we did. But as you can see in the workshop materials, what I suggest we try to do is make a mask for a region, such as the sub-region Western Asia. So the way to do that is we filter this masked layer. So we can right-click and go to Filter. In the context menu of the layer, there's the filter option. And here we can write that we only want the sub-region Western Asia. You can click the test button to see how it, if the expression works. In this case, you don't need to type it, you can also copy it from the document, it's right under the screenshot. If you click test, the filter will be applied, and you will also be able to see it already in the map after hitting test, if it was correct. Alternatively, you can of course look up the sub-region here, and you can click sample to find out all the other available sub-region options. So there is also Western Europe, for example. So if I wanted to make a map of only Western Europe, I can also add sub-region Western Europe, and it automatically changes the filter to that. Western Europe, Western Asia. So it's a very dynamic way, much fewer steps, no extra data sets like you would have if you would just create a polygon layer and then cut a hole in it with difference operation or with some other spatial operation.
So how did you open the filter?
The filter is opened by right-clicking, and in the context menu there's filter. Once you have set a filter, it's easier because then this icon appears here, and you can just click the icon and edit the filter.
Okay.
To achieve the effects that we have here in the workshop materials with this gradient, which is from gray to white, we can use not a simple fill, but a so-called gradient fill. Shapers fill, sorry. Shapers. So the shapers fill is a gradient that starts from the outline of the polygon and goes from one gradient extreme to the other gradient extreme. And you can define with this distance parameter down here how far away you should draw the gradient, or if it should be more closely. And of course you can also change the colors that should be applied. So the trick for the masks is, again, not to use this regular single symbol, because then you would get just this effect where every polygon is rendered with this shape burst fill. But if you change from the single symbol to the inverted polygons, then it doesn't fill the inside of the polygon but the outsides. And this gives you the possibility to create this mask. And you can choose any effects here. It doesn't have to be the shape burst fill. You can also just have a line pattern fill, or any other of the options that QGIS provides. Do you still need some time, or is it okay?
Is it okay? Yes.
Okay, one of the extras that I will just show you here is that you can also have multiple map canvases in QGIS, so you can go to view, new map view, which is on the top, and then you can have multiple maps, and each of these maps can show a different theme. So we could have one map displaying our places theme and another map displaying the coral club. So this is another reason why you might want to use the map themes that I showed you, because it makes it possible to manage what different maps should display. By default, when I move it in this map or I move in that map, it doesn't affect the other one. But you can also have a synchronized view. So you can tell it to synchronize the view center with the other map, and then if you move the one map, it also moves the other one. Most practical use cases for this that I have found is if you have a satellite imagery on the one hand and you have vector data on the other map, and you want to compare both and you want to keep parallel views, then that's really helpful. Or you can also use the one as an overview map where you're really zoomed in, and so you have a second map open that will then give you the context of where am I right now. So you don't have to zoom in and out all the time, but you can look at the one and work in detail on the other. So that's what this extra multiple map canvases section in the workshop materials is about. Now, I think we've done a lot with maps. I wanted to show you something beyond maps, because QGIS by now can do a lot of things that are also in the more data exploration part in non-spatially. And the plugin that I want to recommend you try is the Data Plotly plugin. It was available in the download of the workshop material, so, but if you're online anyway, then you can also install it from the plugin repository. If you know how to install plugins, it's basically plugins, manage and install plugins, connects you with the list of all the available plugins. I'm currently offline, so I only see the plugins that I have installed. But you probably have a much longer list, and you can look for the Data Plotly plugin here. Again, there is the search that can help you, and you can install it from right here. Otherwise, if you're not online, or if you get a plugin as a zip file, like I did provide you for the workshop, you can also install a plugin from zip using this option. It's called install from zip. It basically just means you point to the zip file and it will install it for you. So there's multiple options for offline and online installing of plugins. When you've installed it, you should find the data plotly entry in the plugins menu. And if you click it, it opens a panel where you can then create the diagrams. So the idea that I wanted to show you is how to create a scatter plot of GDP over population, which are two values that are, of course, related. So data plotly supports a lot of different plot types. You can do a scatter plot, you can do box plots for distributions of values, you can do bar plots, histograms, pies, and lots of other stuff. But let's stick to the scatter plot and the countries layer, because that's the one that contains the GDP and the population. Those are the values that we already used before: GDP, MD, and population estimation. Basically, we just configure the X and the Y field, and then we can click Create Plot. And now we have an interactive version of the plot that we can explore. And it even interacts with the map. So if you click one of the larger countries like China or India, then the country will be highlighted on the map as well. You can also, that was the zooming, but there is also a selection here. Which allows you to select multiple countries and see where they are in your map. You can zoom in and out with the mouse wheel. Basically, this gives you a way of not just looking at the data through the spatial perspective, but also exploring all the other data distributions, all within QGIS. What's really neat, it will be out soon or in the latest version of QGIS, but it's not in 3.4 yet, is that you can also add these diagrams to your print map. So you will be able to include it in the map layouts that you prepare for printing with legends and with all the other decorations that a map needs. So this is getting integrated right now and will be available definitely in the next long-term release of QGIS. So your maps can include graphs and maps at the same time without having to go to some external application. Alternatively, you can of course export the diagrams to image or to HTML files for usage in some other applications. These are the buttons down here. So this one is export to HTML, and this one is export to image if you want to use the graphics in some other report. That's what I just showed you.
Can we delete like plot? Because whenever I add, it adds me something in the legend. Can I delete like plots that I've created in that tool?
You have created multiple
Yeah, so if you click again create plot, you will have another one.
Yeah, you can click clean plot canvas beforehand,
Okay.
and then it erases everything you have done before, and you can start fresh.
Okay.
Great. If there are no more questions about data plotly, I want to get to the final part, and that is already creating print maps. And basically, I don't know how much you have already done with print maps, but I think there's a few really neat things that I want to demo you. Basically, what you want to do is go here to Project New Print Layout. You can choose a title. That's really useful, particularly if you want to create a project that contains multiple different layouts, because that's one of the big strengths of QGIS. You can have an unlimited number of layouts associated with your project. You can have one in A3 size format and one in A4. The one can be landscape, the other one can be portrait mode, and you can all store them in the same project. What you see here is just the empty page. You need to add all the items to this page. If you want to change to portrait mode, what you have to do, and that is unfortunately currently very hidden, is you have to go to the page properties. And this is on right click. In the page properties, you can change from portrait to landscape and back, and you can also change the size. This is something that you should do right in the beginning before you add all the other map items, because all the other map items will be relative to the page size, and they won't scale automatically when you change the size here. The reason for why this option is hidden in the right click currently is that a layout can have multiple pages. So that's why they hid it in that way. Okay, but let's just add a map. You can either do it all from this toolbar on the left, or you can go always to the Add Items menu entry, and there you can find all the things that you can add to the map. The concept is that you open the rectangle where you want the map to be placed. Then it will basically show the same extent that you have in the main menus window. So because I have it cut off here weirdly, it's also displayed the same way here. To move the content of the map, we should have to change to the Move Item Content tool. So we currently have the Move Item tool. This makes it possible for us to move the box and resize the box. But if we want to move the map inside the box, we need this other tool. I mean, it makes sense. These are two different operations, but it's sometimes a bit confusing for people to find the two. With this tool, and you can also zoom in the map with your mouse wheel or with the touchpad. While if you have the other tool active, you will actually zoom the page in this way and not the content of the map. So this is a bit tricky, but if you get used to it, there are actually very fine controls for the different parts of this mapping process. If you want a very specific scale, of course, you can enter the numeric value here as well in the item properties. So each item that we add to this map will have these properties. They are always a bit different. So for a map, it's obviously the scale. If we add a label item to have a title, then here we can change the text. And we can change the size of the font and all the other things in this. change these property settings. So whenever you select an item here, the item properties change. It's like in the main window, whenever you change the layer, then the styling panel also changes. Alternatively, if you have some items on the map, particularly if you have many different objects and they have trouble clicking on one specific one to select it, you can also select them here in this item list. So if you have trouble clicking on a specific thing here on the page, you can do it here on the list. Basically here. For most basics maps, of course, you will want to add a legend. It's also one of the items that is listed here in the defaults. Again, you just click somewhere. This positioning thing only appears if you do a single click. If you do the dragging open a rectangle thing, then QGIS automatically positions it there. By default, all the layers that you have in your project will be listed. So if you want to narrow it down, if you want to rename things, you can customize it by again going to the item properties, deactivating this auto update, which basically means that it's always synced with the front page. And then you can select individual entries here and delete them. So we can delete the mask layer, which is anyway not very visible. And we can also rename these entries. So instead of the original dataset name, we might want to click the edit button down here and just call it countries. And we can basically do that for any entry in here to customize our legend. You can also have multiple map items on the same page. So as in this example in the materials, you can have an overview map and a second map which shows you the detail of some place in the world. So we can, also the map items can have different projections. So for example here you can see that the overview map is set to Winkel triple versus the other one which we just had in the default WGS 4326. So adding a second map item is the same thing we did before. You just draw the rectangle somewhere and you will have a second map. But to make it into an overview map, you have to go in the item properties to the overview section, and you have to add the information of which map you want to add as an overview. This is necessary because technically it's possible to add multiple overviews here. So you can have one overview map with different areas highlighted at once. So basically you click on overview and then you say which of the other maps should be highlighted. So this red box now shows the extent of this map 1. This is map 1, this is map 2. Map 2, map 1, and map 2 has an overview set to the extent of map 1.
You can change the extent of the layout here, not in the layout.
Which extent do you want to change?
Extent, for example, here is in around Africa.
Mm-hmm.
I want to change the extent
if you want to move the map content, it's this move item content, and then you can move. And now you can also see that the overview rectangle is automatically adjusted. It also moves when you move the main map.
One question.
Yeah.
If we would like to edit the name of the layer in the legend,
Yeah.
can we edit it outside, like, and then that would get updated, or?
You can edit it here,
Mm-hmm.
and it will be updated in the legend if you have the auto update enabled.
Okay.
But if you have the auto update enabled, it also adds all the other layers that you might previously have deleted.
Okay.
So I can rename this to XXX, and now it's also XXX here.
But in other, okay.
But the others are also here, so if I will have to delete them again if I care about that. But if you just rename it here, that does not affect the name of the layer in the main
Okay.
window. So it's just a one-way street,
Okay.
not a two-way.
Thank you.
So if you want to change the coordinate system of one of these map items, it's also in the item properties. By default, all the map items in the layout use the same projection that you use in the project in the main window, but you can choose any coordinate system here as well. So basically, these are the last ones that I used, but if you're looking for a specific one, you can click the Select CRS button right next to it. And what did I say? We could use the 54042 code. We can look for that here. And this is a nice projection for global map, and you can see that it adjusts, and also the overview red area is now funnily curved because it's trying to approximate the same area, and it's not just drawing a strict straight lines.
Sorry, how did you change the coordinates?
It's in the item properties. At the top of the item properties of the map, there is the coordinate reference.
Yes.
So now we have two maps, and one of them is an overview map, but one thing that we still want to do probably is have them display slightly different styles. And that's again where the map themes come in handy. So we can decide that our overview map should just display the places, for example, and the second map should display the choropleth map, or the other way around. I have messed up my styles, but basically you can decide that which of the map items should show which style by enabling this follow map theme option. I want to show you how that really is supposed to look like. That's why I'm loading now the project that I prepared beforehand, and you also find it in your data download. It's the layouts project. Here you can see with proper configuration that this shows you uses the map theme with the mask symbology that is discussed before, versus the overview map. It just has the basic gray style that we created right in the beginning. And there's also other layouts in this project, like the GDP per capita project. And you can open all of these and have a look. It also contains an atlas layout. Have you heard yet what atlas is in QGIS? Does anyone know? I see a couple of faces. It's a map series. It automatically creates one map for each feature. So what we can set up quite easily in this example is a map for every country. And you can activate the preview here, and it will show you, you can step through all the over 100 countries that there are, and it will be automatically generated. And it can also automatically generate the title, because you can tell it that it should be the name, or the value of the name field in your data set. Besides the Atlas feature, there is also one version that goes even a step further. So Atlas is just a series of the same map. But if you want to create something really sophisticated, there's also a reports feature. I don't think with the remaining time and energy we'll be going through the whole reports feature that there is. But the key idea, and you will find tutorials online, including on my blog, is that you can include title pages. You can have then a series of maps, again like in the Atlas, by defining which features you want to iterate through. And then you can have pages in the back which have closing remarks or any other information that you want to share with the reader. The last little extra...
Just one question about the Atlas.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to have, to adapt the page size or to keep the scale fixed of the maps?
Yeah.
And to adapt the page size,
It's not really a built-in, very user-friendly functionality, but I have seen some posts. I think it was on Stack Exchange, which is again this data-driven approach, where you can have a data-driven size of the page, and it automatically changes that for each page of the Atlas. But we could try to find it on Stack Exchange. Unfortunately, it's not a function there. I can say just enable this and it will automatically do that. But there have been some hacks floating around that do exactly that thing. Okay, finally the last goodie, and you can give it a try or you can just believe me that it works, is QGIS3. Actually, I've included this exact data set of the Manhattan buildings in the workshop data, so you can play around with it. Depending on your machine, on your graphic card, it can take quite a while to load these 3D scenes. But once they're loaded, I find that the performance is pretty impressive, and in newer QGIS versions, I was promised that it's even faster. So you can load the example 5 3D project. And basically what it does is it has one regular view of the data set, and it has one 3D map of the data set. And it takes a while, even on this laptop. I used to have one Asus laptop where 3D view always crashed. I think it was because of the graphic card. So if it also crashes for you, maybe you also have tough luck. But eventually, you get a really nice 3D view that you can interact with. It's easier with a mouse than with a touchpad to navigate through the whole scene.
Can you also synchronize the two visualizations?
I think I can synchronize it somewhere. No, I can't find it. Maybe it's not possible yet. It was only with the 2D maps because there it's easier. In this case, I guess it would be a bit harder to synchronize it. But what you can do is you can also print this 3D view. So this has already been implemented. The layout, you have the add item 3D map as well here. So this will add another item. And basically what you need here again is patience. It is doing something in the background, but you need to give it time to render all the things. And because we talked in the beginning about the Google Summer of Code project, the results are not included yet, but what the Google Summer of Code project will be able to do for you is if you have a point layer, you can put up so-called billboards. So it's like advertising outside. It will put a sign at the location of this point, and you can put images on it or some symbology. And independent of how you rotate the scene, you will always be able to see this sign at this specific location in the 3D scene. So development is still ongoing in this area. And yeah, rendering this high resolution for the print map is taking really long time. Now it's here.
How do we load it? Sorry.
You might have to click the copy settings from 3D view button in the item properties,
Yeah.
and then
And
it
then
starts
wait.
rendering. Okay. In the workshop materials, you will find further materials, more links if you want to dive deeper into animations. For example, I have a lot of tutorials online for creating animated maps in QGIS using the Time Manager plugin that I wrote. There's also, we could spend hours talking about geometry generators, which are really cool if you like building the expressions now for the labeling and for the symbolizing. Wait until you have seen the geometry generators, because they really open up a completely new level of flexibility. Like, if you just have a layer of districts and a layer of bike sharing stations, like in this example, you can create connections between all the districts and the bicycle sharing stations with a few lines of code, which is basically make line from centroid of the geometry to a certain city bike station with this specific name. So you can select features from different layers, you can get their geometry, you can manipulate it, you can make line layers without having a file anywhere. It's just created on the fly and it's shown on the map. And it doesn't just have to be straight lines like here. I have actually an example online which shows you how to create these fancy, I termed them conveyor belt connections between different places. And the only thing that exists here is a line with two fields, and that is the size of this end of the conveyor belt and the size on this end of the conveyor belt, and the rest is all generated with code. So you can imagine we could really dive deep into all of these things. And yeah, I invite you to look through all the references here and have fun with QGIS. And thanks for having me today. If there are any more questions, please, I'm still around, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much. And now it's time for questions. If you have questions, curiosity about what Anita shows us, or in general about QGIS and so on.
Yeah, I have one on data plotting.
Yeah.
And I didn't see him on the possible, let's say, diagrams, like radar diagrams, like the,
Yeah.
or I don't know if it's the proper name or not. I don't know if it could be maybe implemented somehow, or if there is a way to make this kind of.
I imagine if it's a default plot that is available in Plotly, because it's a different library that is used here, then we could also include it in this plugin. But we would have to check the Plotly project and then see how difficult it is to integrate it into the QGIS plugin.
And still on this topic, because you showed us you make a sort of diagram related to the whole layer.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible also to make it for each and every feature and then eventually display it in the atlas? I mean, because for example, if one feature has, I don't know, 6 different attributes, and I want to display these attributes for every feature, like with Instagram or doesn't matter which is the diagram.
I don't think it works that way, because you can only select single individual fields and not a set of fields. But what you can do maybe is use the diagram renderer.
Yeah.
Because that allows you to visualize different fields. I don't think Data Plotly is the right tool for that.
Okay.